generation of cows produce lots of milk was to take the best milkers and make certain that those cows that produce the most milk were the ones that reproduced. Yes? Selective breeding. Oh, the variations are heritable. Variations are heritable. So that the surest way of ensuring that you had cows that produce lots of milk in the next generation is make certain the cows that produce lots of milk were the ones that bred, and not your loser cow, not the one that never really produced a lot of milk. Make certain you don't breed that cow. Right? And these are principles that people have been operating on for millennia, right, to produce all sorts of different domesticated breeds of animals and plants. And in fact, let's see here. Here's an example that you're probably pretty familiar with of variation and selective breeding in a domesticated animal, the dog. And then, as well as now, people understood that the ancestor of the dog was the wolf. Right? They're the same species. Dogs and wolves will interbreed. I used to have a dog 20 years ago that was a quarter wolf, so that's evidence that at least in that one instance they successfully bred. But from a common ancestor that looks something like this, we get all these different breeds of dogs. Same species, different breeds. And how were these breeds produced? Well, by people being cognizant of these interesting variations and making certain those dogs that have these variations bred. So, for instance, if you want a small dog, make certain the smallest in your litter keeps breeding, and the big dogs don't. You want a big dog, like the Great Dane, do the opposite. Right? And people have bred all sorts of dogs for very specific, if you're interested in dogs, very, very specific traits. Right? Golden retrievers are bred to retrieve game in hunting. Right? They're gun dogs, so they were bred not to be shy around guns and not to be shy away from the firing of guns. Something these gun dogs were bred in the 1800s as people started to hunt more and more with rifles. Okay? In fact, this is the dog that I promised my daughter when we came up to Berkeley. We moved to Berkeley, he did a puppy, and it worked. But it's an interesting, it's an interesting side note, which also supports what I've been telling you. That dog, it's a golden retriever. You know what golden retrievers are? They're big, fluffy, tennis ball obsessed dogs. But they have lots of fur along the chest. It's very tufty fur. It's called guard hair. And the show dogs have huge manes of tufty guard hair fur. Well, this dog came from my PhD advisor, David Hills, who's at the University of Texas at Austin. He and some other Texas professors, who are all hunters, as an aside, thought that they wanted to breed golden retrievers specifically for Texas. So here we're talking about now really fine-tuning what you're breeding for, right? So what did they do? They wanted dogs, golden retrievers, because they like the traits of golden retrievers. They wanted golden retrievers that didn't have so much guard hairs, because one thing you know is if your dog's bounding around in the high weeds of Texas, A, it's hot, and you don't want a lot of fur, and B, you don't want to spend all your time grooming out furs from your dog's fur, right? And so this dog, if you were to compare her to other show dogs and kind of, we don't talk about in our family, but you would note that she doesn't have a lot of guard hair. But it was deliberate. It was absolutely deliberate. Right? So that's an interesting thing to think about, is how fine-tuned people can be about selecting these traits and after a very short amount of time getting a response. And he also points out, Darwin points out, that there appears to be no limit to the degree of change you can get by selective breeding. Okay? So that would be the last thing I want to mention. And just looking at different dog breeds, I mean, looking at Chihuahua and a Great Dane, sometimes I have a hard time believing they're the same species. They are, but it's hard to believe that they're the same species. And I have had this question, Great Danes and Chihuahuas breeding. I don't know if that ever happens, but certainly there could be intermediate breeds through which they could breed, so they are the same species. Okay? All right, that's the first thing Darwin points out. And once again, he's not telling the reader anything new. This is all stuff that they understood, even if it had not been explicitly stated. This was not surprising. Nothing he said in that first chapter was surprising. Neither was there much of surprise in the second chapter. Here he's talking about variation in the wild. That is to say, non-domesticated species. He says, well, this is what we see in domesticated species. Is it the case that domesticated species are special in terms of the types of variation you see? And his answer is no. If you go out in nature, you see variation as well in species that are out there. He argues that this variation is of the same sort in degree as you see in domesticated species, and that it is also heritable. So here he is not telling the reader anything that's too new either. Remembering, up here everybody's familiar with domesticated species because there was this real connection with farming. But down here, it's also the case that many Victorians were enthusiastic naturalists. So what do I mean by that? A lot of people, if you were to go into a well-heeled middle-class home in Victorian England, there would be a good chance they'd have a cabinet called a curio cabinet, where they'd keep all the interesting things they found on their walks around town. Interesting rocks. Maybe they would have a collection of beetles or some organisms, maybe eggs if they were birders. But people would be collecting things from nature. It was considered kind of an interesting hobby at the time. And so people were more aware now than they are perhaps now of nature and what you see out in nature. So people were aware of variation in the wild as well. Okay, the third part of his argument was a little more difficult for people to accept. And this is what he termed the struggle for existence. And why this was a little more difficult for people at the time to accept is because at the time there was this idea that many people believed called natural theology. There's a lot of different components to this idea, one being, for instance, that nature is structured for the benefit of man. But it's also this idea that nature works in harmony, that all the different species and organisms out there are kind of the part of a harmonious whole. Okay? And this is quite different than how Darwin depicts nature. He points out to the reader that if you look out in nature, it's not a harmonious whole at all. It's, you have lions chasing gazelle, and then they eat them. Right? What's harmonious about that? The gazelle are running for their dear life because they don't want to be eaten. Not only that, within species, you see competition among individuals for access to mates, for example. Right? There was nothing harmonious about nature as far as Darwin saw it. Okay? So he had to point these things out to the reader. Once again, this wasn't a very long stretch for the reader to believe this, had to be notified or informed of this and given evidence of it. But he had to counter this idea of natural theology, and as he pointed out that there is a struggle for existence. And as supporting evidence, he talked about an essay by Thomas Malthus, which was published, I believe, in 1798, on population growth. Okay? And what he points out is that in humans, and Darwin points out the same is true for other species, in humans there's a great excess of reproductive potential. That is to say, organisms can produce many, many more young than can possibly survive to adulthood. Okay? So excess reproductive potential is part of the struggle for existence. Not everybody who's born can live to achieve adulthood. That's the problem. Malthus, many of you are probably familiar with his ideas. I'll state it again, just make certain you know them. And he had this idea of what he called potential for Malthusian crisis, is what we call it now. But if you were to plot time on the x-axis, he points out that populations, organisms, tend to grow in what's called an exponential manner. It's a compounding of, the number of offspring born next year depends on your current population size, right? So it's kind of this compound interest type of phenomenon. So whenever you see this type of exponentially growing curve, it's indicative of sort of exponential growth. One organism becoming 2, 2 organisms becoming 4 in terms of this binary fission, if you have that type of reproductive pattern like many bacteria or single-celled organisms have. So this is how organisms reproduce. How does our food supply increase? Well, he points out that food supply tends to increase linearly. Okay, why is that the case? Well, if you want to grow more corn, you make it, you plow under another field and you plant more corn. That is not, that is not an exponential or compounding type of growth. It's just you plow another field, right? So food production grows linearly. At least that was Malthus's argument. And the problem is that when your population exceeds your food supply, you've got problems, right? That was his point. So Darwin used Malthus's argument in The Origin of Species, mostly to point out the problems with that organisms have this excess reproductive potential. Okay, not everybody who's born can live to adulthood. Of course, just as an aside, you might ask, why have we not reached this Malthusian crisis, even though we're definitely going exponentially in the human population? And one of the answers is that our food supplies managed to keep up largely through selective breeding. Right? So we've been able to breed through what's called artificial selection crops that are much more productive on a per acre basis than they used to be. Okay? Once again, if you're careful about things, you don't lose your wits. You can breed corn, as an example, that has many more ears of corn or much higher oil content or whatever trait you're interested in selecting for that has variation and it's heritable. You can select for that trait. Okay? And that's one of the reasons why we haven't experienced yet the Malthusian crisis is because of artificial selection. Okay, so we've gone through the different parts of the theory. Do you want to look good? Do you want to have friends? Do you want to be successful? Now he's going to drop the big one. So now he introduces this idea of natural selection. So what he points out is that if you have variation that's heritable, and if some of these traits that these organisms bear allow them to fare better in the struggle for existence, that is to say, if you have a trait that allows you to survive to adulthood or reproductive age at a higher rate than organisms that don't have the trait, or if that trait allows you to have more offspring, that trait will be disproportionately represented in the next generation. The higher proportion of the population will have that trait in the next generation. That's all there is to natural selection. It's almost illogical. It is a logical extension of these different facts that I've already told you about. So that's the nice thing about this part of the argument is if you've accepted the statements before this in the previous 3 chapters, it follows that natural selection must be true. If you have a trait that allows you to fare better in the struggle for existence, that trait will be disproportionately represented in the next generation. Now, there's a couple things to keep in mind about natural selection. First of all, it's not the individual that evolves, it's the composition of the species that changes, that evolves. That's an important point to keep in mind. This is how it differs from Lamarck's theory, where individuals would gain or acquire a trait over their lifetime and pass that acquired trait on to their offspring. Of course, we know that doesn't work now. They knew it at the time it didn't. But that is a key difference. Darwin's theory explains how the composition of a species can change in a particular trait. It's species that evolves, not organisms, not individuals. Populations or species evolve, not individuals. Another point I want to make is this is the only process that we're aware of that causes what's called adaptation. So what is adaptation? So this is where natural theology was pretty compelling, which is to say, look, it looks as if species are actually designed to fit into their place in nature, right? Lions have claws and teeth. The gazelle that they chase and try to eat are fast, right, with long legs and they're springy, right? You can follow this to any organism at all and say, look, that species looks like it's well designed for the role it plays in nature. And what Darwin's saying is, no, that only appears to be designed. That this process called natural selection can cause this fit between the organism and the environment in which it lives. Because these traits are helping the species survive and reproduce in the environment in which it lives, this process of natural selection can cause the species to become adapted to its environment over time. Now, if the environment changes, of course, then the species, its fit to the environment will not be so good, at least not initially. But natural selection will cause the species to sort of chase the environment around, always trying to make it as best adapted to the environment as it can be. Another thing he points out is that there's lots of time, so you can have lots of change. It's not lots. So how much can these species change? Well, he says there's almost unlimited the amount of change you can see in a species through this process of natural selection because you have so much time available. Now, remember, we never really had, I'll discuss this in a later lecture in geology, but we never really were able to put years to assign an absolute age to a rock until 60 years ago with radiometric age dating. That is to say, for the longest time, we could not go to a rock and say that rock is about 200 million years old. All we could say up to about 1950 was that rock is older than that rock. You get the relative age of those rocks. But at the time, just by, if you look at the rock column and say, okay, this rock is underneath this rock, which is underneath this rock, people were able to accumulate miles of thickness of rocks, right, in terms of the geological record that they had, even by the time that Darwin was around. And they knew that wasn't something that was going to occur fast. It was going to take millions, or like I said, some people even speculated hundreds of millions of years. Darwin thought that maybe a couple 100 million years would be enough time for his theory. Turns out that there's a lot more time available. And there was one crisis with this theory. So there's always been this, physicists always tend to speak authoritatively when they do speak, right? They've got physics is a very impressive field where you can predict very precisely the position of a planet, where you can split an atom and make a big bomb. Those things are very impressive, right, to anybody. And so when physicists speak, they listen. Well, shortly after The Origin of Species was published, Lord Kelvin, who was a physicist, spoke. And he said, you know what, this can't be right because the sun can't be more than a couple million years old. We don't have enough time. And his argument was that the sun was basically burning, he didn't know about nuclear fusion, that it was burning a fixed amount of fuel. And so he just backed out. It looks like the sun's going to run its course in a couple million years and could not have been burned for more than a couple million years. Of course, that was based on a faulty model. We now know that's incorrect. But at the time, it threw a lot of people for a loop. And Darwin was shaken by that, by Lord Kelvin coming out. Lord means that he was kind of a high social status, right? To have somebody of that stature come out and say that this theory can't be right for a very simple reason was worrisome, to say the least. But it turns out, over time, people realized that Lord Kelvin was wrong, and that there's been more time has been found, not less time. We have 4.5 billion years of time to work with, as we now know. I think I want to finish up a little bit more. I can barely see the clock there. So traits only benefit the individual. So let's talk about these traits that are under natural selection, being selected for by this process of natural selection. Darwin argues that these traits can only be beneficial to the organism that bears them. You can't have a trait evolving that benefits somebody else. Why would natural selection cannot operate or would not work in that case? So, or a trait that benefits another species would be a very difficult one to explain under his theory. Now, of course, we now know there are cases where traits seemingly benefit other individuals within the same species. Examples would be, for instance, in bees or ants. You have many individuals in a nest that forego reproduction for the benefit of the nest. How do you explain that? How can you ever have a trait evolving that says don't reproduce because it helps that guy over there, the queen? Well, the answer, as we now know, is a process called kin selection, when it's a trait that's evolving because it's benefiting very, very closely related individuals. In the case of hymenopterans, abnormally highly related individuals. So we can't explain the few instances of apparent altruistic behavior that's out there. It would be difficult to explain spiteful behavior, where both the individual that receives the spiteful behavior and the individual that gives the spiteful behavior both suffer a consequence. We haven't seen that in nature. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop at this point, and we'll talk about the last bits of this argument next lecture, then we'll move on to population genetics.